Welcome to Nightmare Fuel Stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy the stories. Number the DROWNED, the sea keeps its secrets well. That's what my grandfather always told me, his weathered face creased by decades of salt and sun as he gazed out across the Atlantic. As a Coast Guard rescue swimmer stationed at the remote Blackrock Station on Maine's northern coast, I've learned just how right he was. My name is Daniel Mercer. For 6 years, I've pulled people from angry waters, sometimes alive, sometimes not. I've witnessed the ocean's capacity for both beauty and brutality, but nothing prepared me for what happened 3 weeks ago, an event that has left me questioning everything I thought I knew about reality, about time, about death itself. It began with a distress call at 3:17 a.m. during the worst November storm I'd seen in my career. The winds howled at nearly 70 knots, and waves crashed against our station windows like watery fists demanding entry. Most of our team was deployed farther south, assisting with evacuations along the flooded coastline, leaving just myself, Lieutenant Commander Hayes, and 2 junior officers to mind Blackrock Station. The call came through broken and staticky, a vessel in distress approximately 12 miles northeast of our position. The voice on the radio sounded strange, distant, and hollow, like someone speaking through an old tin can. "Taking on water, please, 13 souls aboard the Minerva." Hayes and I exchanged glances. The Minerva, something about that name tugged at my memory, but in the chaos of the moment, I couldn't place it. "Roger that, Minerva." "This is USCG Blackrock Station. Can you confirm your position and status?" Hayes's voice remained steady as she adjusted the radio frequency, trying to clear the interference. More static then. "Sinking fast, please hurry." The transmission cut off abruptly. Hayes tried repeatedly to re-establish contact while I prepared for immediate deployment. Within 20 minutes, our MH-60 Jayhawk helicopter was battling the storm, with me secured in the cabin alongside our rescue equipment. The helicopter's spotlight cut through the darkness, illuminating the churning waters below. Rain lashed against the windows with such force it sounded like gravel. Our pilot, Rodriguez, fought to keep us stable as gusts threatened to knock us sideways. "I don't see anything," Rodriguez called back after 30 minutes of searching. "No vessel, no debris, nothing on radar." I peered out, scanning the violent seas. The waves were massive, 15-footers at least, with whitecaps that resembled skeletal hands reaching upward. And then there, a faint light blinking irregularly through the storm. "2 o'clock," I shouted. About half a mile, Rodriguez adjusted our course, bringing us closer to the light source. As we approached, my stomach tightened. There was no ship, just what appeared to be a cluster of life jackets and emergency lights bobbing among the waves. "People in the water, I'm going down," I said, already securing my helmet and checking my harness. Hayes nodded grimly from the co-pilot's seat. The descent into that storm was like being lowered into hell. The wind yanked at me, spinning me like a toy. Rain stung my exposed skin like needles. But this was the job, the reason I'd joined the Coast Guard, to save lives when the sea decided to take them. I hit the water and immediately detached from the hoist. The cold was shocking, even through my dry suit. Waves crashed over my head as I swam toward the nearest survivor, a figure clinging weakly to a life ring. "Coast Guard," I shouted above the storm. "I'm here to help you." As I reached the person, a man, and grabbed his harness, I got my first clear look at his face in the beam of my waterproof flashlight. What I saw made me falter. His skin was pale, yes, expected for someone in frigid Atlantic waters, but it had a strange, almost translucent quality. His eyes, when they met mine, seemed too dark, too deep, but most disturbing was his clothing. Not modern survival gear, but what appeared to be an old wool peacoat and canvas trousers, the kind seafarers might have worn decades ago. "Thank God," the man gasped, his voice the same hollow tone I'd heard on the radio. "The others." "Please, the others." I signaled for the basket to be lowered and secured him inside, watching as he was hoisted up to the helicopter. Then I turned my attention to the remaining survivors scattered across perhaps 100 yards of churning sea. One by one I brought them in, 7 in total, each displaying the same unsettling characteristics, that strange pallor, those dark eyes, and clothing that belonged in another era. None carried modern identification. None wore contemporary life vests. Their bodies were ice cold, even for people who'd been in the Atlantic, and they spoke little beyond murmured thanks and pleas for their shipmates. The last survivor was a young woman, perhaps in her 20s, with long dark hair plastered to her skull by the seawater. As I secured my arm around her waist, she turned to face me. Unlike the others, her eyes weren't dark, but a pale, luminous blue that seemed to glow faintly in the storm's darkness. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered, her lips barely moving. "You've opened the door now." Before I could respond, a massive wave crashed over us. I lost my grip on her for a moment, and when I surfaced, sputtering and disoriented, she was gone. I spun in frantic circles, my flashlight beam cutting through the rain and spray. "I've lost one," I shouted into my radio. "Female survivor, dark hair. Mercer, we need you up now." Hayes's voice crackled through. "Storm's intensifying, we can't hold position much longer. There's someone still out here," I protested. "That's an order, Mercer. We're at risk of going down ourselves." Reluctantly, I signaled for retrieval. As the hoist cable lowered, I took one last desperate scan of the surrounding waters. Nothing, just endless, angry sea. The young woman had vanished completely. Back in the helicopter, I checked on the survivors we'd managed to rescue. They huddled together in silence, water pooling beneath them on the cabin floor. In the harsh interior lights, they looked even stranger, their skin not just pale but with a faint greenish-blue tinge, their eyes sunken and distant. "What ship were you on?" I asked the man I'd rescued first, raising my voice over the roar of the rotors. He looked at me with those two dark eyes. "The Minerva," he said. "We were bound for Boston from Liverpool." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with my wet gear. "When did you leave port?" The man's brow furrowed. "October 12th, he said. 1907. I stared at him, certain I'd misheard. But the man's expression remained earnest, confused. I looked at the others, who nodded in solemn agreement. "The Minerva," one of the older survivors added, his accent distinctly British. "Finest vessel of the White Star Line." My blood ran cold. I knew the name now. The Minerva was a passenger steamship that had disappeared in a November storm off the Maine coast 115 years ago. All hands and passengers, some 63 souls, had been lost. The wreck had never been found. I turned away, my mind racing. This was impossible. These people couldn't be survivors of a century-old shipwreck. Yet here they were, in clothing from another era, speaking of the Minerva as if they'd just left her decks. When we landed back at Blackrock Station, medical personnel were waiting. The survivors were rushed to the station's small infirmary for assessment while Hayes pulled me aside. "What the hell happened out there, Mercer?" she demanded. "Those people, something's not right." I explained what the survivors had told me about the Minerva. Hayes's expression shifted from skepticism to concern. "That's not possible," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "I know," I replied, "but they believe it. Mass delusion, maybe. Hypothermia can cause confusion." I nodded, willing to accept any rational explanation. "Maybe, but their clothes, Hayes, those aren't modern." Before she could respond, one of the medical technicians approached, his face pale. "Commander Mercer, you need to see this." We followed him to the infirmary, where the survivors sat on examination tables, still wrapped in thermal blankets. A female technician was reviewing data on a tablet, her hands visibly shaking. "Their body temperatures," she said without preamble, "they're all exactly 50 degrees Fahrenheit. "That's not possible," Hayes said for the second time that hour. "Core temps that low." "They'd be dead, that's not all," the male technician added. "No pulse readings, no blood pressure, but they're conscious and responsive." I stared at the survivors, who gazed back with those dark, bottomless eyes. All except one, a middle-aged man with a captain's beard, who was looking not at us but through the infirmary window at the raging sea beyond. "We need to return," he said suddenly, his voice carrying easily despite its quiet tone. "The sea is calling us back." As if triggered by his words, all 7 survivors stood in perfect unison. The medical staff stepped back instinctively. "Please," said the first man I'd rescued, "we must go back." "We don't belong here." Hayes moved to block the door. "Nobody's going anywhere until we figure out what's happening." The captain, for I was now certain that's who he was, smiled sadly. "You cannot keep what belongs to the deep, Commander." And then, before any of us could react, all 7 survivors simply collapsed, not like people fainting, but like puppets whose strings had been cut. They hit the floor with dull, wet thuds. The medical team rushed forward, checking for vital signs. I already knew what they'd find. The bodies on the floor were no longer merely cold, but ice cold, with the unmistakable rigidity of death. "They're gone," the female technician whispered, "all of them." But that wasn't the most disturbing part. As we watched in horror, their bodies began to change. The skin grew more translucent, revealing not the red muscle tissue one might expect, but something darker, greener. The flesh seemed to soften, to liquefy at the edges. And the smell, dear God, the smell. Not the expected scent of human death, but something ancient and briny, like the bottom of a tide pool left too long in the sun. "Get them into body bags," Hayes ordered, her voice tight. Now. Within an hour, the bodies were sealed away in the station's small morgue. Hayes had called in the incident to headquarters, carefully omitting the more inexplicable details. An investigation team would arrive once the storm passed, we were told. Until then, we were to secure the station and document everything. I volunteered for the first watch, too wired to sleep. Around 2 a.m., as the storm finally began to abate, I made my rounds through the quiet station. When I reached the corridor leading to the morgue, I noticed something odd, a trail of water on the floor, leading from the morgue door toward the station's rear exit. My heart pounding, I pushed open the morgue door. All 7 body bags lay unzipped and empty on their slabs, but that wasn't what froze me in place. On the wall, written in what looked like wet sand and seaweed, were the words, "She is still out there." I ran to wake Hayes, and within minutes the entire station was on alert. A search of the perimeter revealed nothing except a set of wet footprints leading down to the shore, where they disappeared into the surf. The storm had passed, leaving behind a deceptively calm sea under a clearing sky. "We need to report this," Hayes said, staring out at the dark water. "All of it, whatever headquarters thinks." I nodded, but found myself looking back at the ocean. "She's still out there, the young woman with the pale blue eyes, the one I'd lost in the storm. Was she trying to warn me when she said I'd opened a door, or was it a threat?" The investigation team arrived the following afternoon, 2 officials from Coast Guard headquarters and, surprisingly, a civilian consultant who introduced herself as Dr. Eleanor Marsh, a marine archaeologist specializing in shipwrecks. While Hayes briefed the officials, Dr. Marsh pulled me aside. "Tell me exactly what the survivors said," she requested, her keen eyes studying my face. "Every detail you can remember." I recounted the events as precisely as possible. When I mentioned the Minerva and the date 1907, Dr. Marsh's expression grew intense. "The Minerva is something of an obsession in my field," she explained. "One of the great unsolved maritime mysteries. She vanished without a trace, no distress call, no debris ever found, just gone. They said they were bound for Boston from Liverpool," I added. Dr. Marsh nodded. "That matches the historical record. She departed Liverpool on October 12, 1907, and was last spotted by another vessel on November 4th, approximately 200 miles east of Maine. After that, nothing. Until last night," I said quietly. Dr. Marsh's eyes met mine. "Perhaps, or perhaps something else entirely." "What do you mean?" She hesitated. "There are theories about certain areas of the ocean, places where the boundary between our world and something else grows thin. The Bermuda Triangle gets all the publicity, but there are other locations, including a stretch of the North Atlantic not far from here." I might have dismissed such talk as pseudoscientific nonsense before last night. Now I found myself listening intently. "Some believe these boundaries can weaken during certain conditions," she continued. "Powerful storms, specific astronomical alignments. Times when things or people might slip through from one side to the other." "You're talking about ghosts," I said flatly. "I'm talking about possibilities," she corrected. "Science hasn't explained everything, Mr. Mercer. Especially when it comes to the deep ocean." Before I could respond, one of the officials approached, requesting Dr. Marsh's presence for the examination of the morgue. I was left alone with my thoughts and the growing certainty that whatever we'd encountered was far beyond ordinary explanation. That night I dreamed of the sea. Not the violent, storm-tossed waters of the rescue, but a calm, glassy surface that seemed to extend forever under a starless sky. Standing on that impossible ocean was the young woman with the pale blue eyes. "You have to stop it," she said, her voice clearer than it had been during our brief encounter. "Before more come through." "Stop what?" I asked. "What's happening?" "The door swings both ways now," she replied. "They want to return. But others want to come through." "Others?" Her eyes seemed to glow brighter. "The deep is patient, Daniel Mercer. It has waited centuries, and now it hungers." I woke with a start, my sheets soaked with sweat that smelled faintly of salt water. The digital clock beside my bed read 3:17 a.m., exactly the time we'd received the distress call from the Minerva. A strange compulsion pulled me from my bed. I dressed quickly and made my way through the silent station to the observation deck that overlooked the sea. The night was clear now, the storm long past, with a 3/4 moon casting a silver path across the gentle waves. And there, at the edge where moonlight met dark water, was a ship. Not a modern vessel, but an early 20th century steamship, its single funnel belching black smoke into the night sky. Even from this distance I could make out the name painted on its bow, Minerva. I stood frozen, convinced I was still dreaming. The ship shouldn't exist, couldn't exist, yet there it was, as solid and real as the deck beneath my feet. And on its rail, clearly visible in the moonlight, stood figures, 7 of them. The survivors we'd rescued now returned to their vessel. As I watched, unable to look away, an 8th figure joined them at the rail. A young woman with long dark hair. She alone turned toward shore, toward me, and even across that impossible distance, I felt her pale blue eyes lock with mine. She raised one hand, pointing not at me but at the water directly below the observation deck. Compelled by some force I couldn't name, I looked down. The sea beneath the station was moving. Not with waves or currents, but with shapes, human-like forms pressing upward against the water's surface as if it were a membrane about to tear. Dozens of them, hundreds. Pale, outstretched hands and distorted faces pushing, clawing at the boundary between their world and mine. I stumbled backward, a cry caught in my throat. When I looked up again, the Minerva was fading, dissolving like mist in morning sun. The 7 figures at its rail remained visible longest, their dark eyes fixed on the shore, before they too vanished into the night. I reported what I'd seen to Hayes and Dr. Marsh the next morning, expecting disbelief. Instead, the marine archaeologist nodded thoughtfully. The Minerva isn't the only ship to have disappeared in these waters, she said. There have been dozens over the centuries. The Mary Celeste was found abandoned not far from here. The Carol A. Deering ran aground with no crew aboard. Something about this stretch of ocean. It takes ships and people. But now they're coming back, I said. Why now? Dr. Marsh looked troubled. I don't know. But I've been reviewing historical weather data. The storm 2 nights ago, its barometric pressure, wind patterns, lunar position, they exactly match the conditions recorded on November 4, 1907. The night the Minerva disappeared, Hayes said quietly. Dr. Marsh nodded. Perhaps such conditions don't just allow ships to vanish. Perhaps they allow them to return. That afternoon, headquarters ordered Blackrock Station temporarily closed pending a full investigation. Most personnel, including Hayes and the investigation team, were reassigned to other stations along the coast. I was granted leave, mandatory leave, with a psychological evaluation scheduled before I could return to active duty. As the others packed and prepared to depart, Dr. Marsh sought me out one last time. I believe you, Daniel, she said simply, about what you saw, about all of it. Thank you, I replied, surprised by how much her validation meant to me. But I'm worried, she continued, her voice lowering. If I'm right about these doorways opening under specific conditions, then we need to be prepared. I've calculated when similar atmospheric and astronomical alignments might occur. She handed me a folded paper. The next potential event is in 3 weeks, December 17th. There's predicted to be a winter storm system moving through, and the lunar phase will be identical to November 4th, 1907. I took the paper, feeling its weight like a physical burden. What am I supposed to do with this? Dr. Marsh's eyes were solemn. Be vigilant and remember what she told you, the woman with the blue eyes, about the door swinging both ways. After everyone left, I was alone at Blackrock Station. I was supposed to depart too, but I called in with a fabricated excuse about securing some personal items. In truth, I couldn't leave, not yet. Something held me here, some invisible tether connecting me to the events of that night and to the mysterious young woman who had both warned and beckoned me. For 2 weeks I lived like a hermit in the empty station, venturing out only to obtain supplies from the small coastal town 5 miles south. I spent hours watching the sea, searching for any sign of the Minerva or its ghostly passengers. I researched everything I could find about the ship, about disappearances in this region, about folklore concerning the ocean's dead. What I discovered disturbed me deeply. The Minerva wasn't just any passenger ship. It had been carrying a controversial cargo, artifacts recovered from a submerged temple off the coast of Greece, bound for the Boston Museum of Antiquities. The temple had reportedly been dedicated to an obscure sea deity that predated the Olympian gods, a primordial entity the ancient mariners both worshipped and feared. December 17th arrived with ominous predictability. The forecasted storm developed offshore, gathering strength as it moved toward the main coast. By evening, conditions were deteriorating rapidly, with gale-force winds and heavy snow reducing visibility to near zero. I stood at the window of the observation deck, watching the whitecaps grow more pronounced as darkness fell. The barometer on the wall dropped steadily, approaching the exact reading Dr. Marsh had predicted, the same reading recorded on the night of November 4, 1907. At precisely 3:17 a.m., the radio in the command center crackled to life. I raced down the corridor, my heart pounding. The radio shouldn't be operational. The station's communications had been officially shut down pending the investigation, yet the speaker hissed and popped with static, and through it came a voice, her voice. Daniel Mercer, she said, that same hollow, distant quality making her words echo strangely. You need to come now, they're breaking through. I grabbed my gear without hesitation, dry suit, helmet, emergency beacon. The rational part of my brain screamed that this was madness, that I should call for backup, that I shouldn't go out alone in a winter storm. But rationality had abandoned me the moment I'd looked into those impossible pale blue eyes. The station kept one rigid-hulled inflatable boat for emergency use. I launched it into the churning seas, fighting the controls as waves crashed over the bow. The snow and spray nearly blinded me as I navigated by instinct, heading northeast, the same direction we'd flown on the night we'd found the survivors. After 20 minutes of battling the elements, I cut the engine and drifted. The sea around me was a cauldron of white-capped waves and swirling snow, but directly ahead, the water appeared strangely calm, a perfect circle of stillness perhaps 50 yards across. At its center floated the young woman, her long dark hair spreading around her like seaweed, her pale blue eyes luminous in the darkness. I guided the boat to the edge of the calm circle. Up close, I could see that she wasn't floating on the surface, but was somehow suspended half in, half out of the water, as if the boundary between air and sea had become permeable around her. "You came," she said, her voice clearer now, almost normal. "I wasn't sure you would. Who are you?" I asked, my words immediately whipped away by the wind. "My name was Eleanor," she replied. "Eleanor Marsh." I felt as if the bottom had dropped out of my world. "That's impossible. Dr. Marsh is alive. I just spoke with her 2 weeks ago." The woman Eleanor smiled sadly. "Time moves differently on the other side, Daniel. What is past for you may be future for me, or present, or all at once." My mind reeled. The Dr. Marsh I met is me, yes, or will be me, or was me. "It doesn't matter now." She moved closer to the boat, never seeming to swim but gliding through the water as if it were air. "What matters is that they're coming. The storm has weakened the boundary again, and they've been waiting. So many of them for so long." "Who?" I demanded. "Who's coming?" "The ancient ones, the original inhabitants of the deep. Humanity thinks it knows the ocean, but you've only scratched the surface." Her expression grew more urgent. "The Minerva didn't just disappear, Daniel. It was taken. Its cargo disturbed things that should have remained buried, and now those things want to reclaim what they believe is theirs. The artifacts," I said, remembering my research. "From the submerged temple," Eleanor nodded, "but not just objects. They want the surface. They want your world." As if summoned by her words, the water around the calm circle began to change. It darkened, not with depth but with something else, a viscous quality that reminded me horribly of the way the survivors' bodies had begun to liquefy in the morgue. And then I saw them, shapes moving beneath that darkened surface. Not human, though they had limbs and what might generously be called faces. Ancient things, twisted by eons in the lightless deep, their forms both solid and fluid, their movements suggesting anatomies that defied terrestrial logic. "My God," I whispered. "They have no interest in your God," Eleanor said grimly. "They were old when humanity's first deities were conceived. They've been patient, but the door is open now and they're hungry." "How do we stop them?" I asked, unable to look away from the horrors gathering beneath us. Eleanor's eyes met mine, and in them I saw both determination and resignation. "We don't." "I do." Before I could question her meaning, she reached out and grasped my wrist. Her touch was ice cold and impossibly strong. "The boundary works both ways, Daniel. I can close it, seal it shut for another century at least, but there's a cost." Her gaze intensified. "Someone has to stay on the other side, someone connected to both worlds." Understanding dawned. "The Dr. Marsh I met came back to ensure this moment would happen," she confirmed. "A loop that must be completed." The dark water began to roil more violently, those not quite human shapes pressing upward with increasing urgency. The circle of calm was shrinking, the storm encroaching from all sides. "You need to go," Eleanor said. "Now, get as far from this place as you can." I shook my head. "I can't just leave you." Her cold fingers tightened on my wrist. "You must, and you must tell no one what happened here. The story ends with you, Daniel Mercer." With unexpected strength, she pushed me away. My boat drifted backward, out of the shrinking circle of calm and into the storm's fury. Eleanor remained at the center, her form beginning to glow with a pale blue light that matched her eyes. "Wait," I called out. "Will I see you again? Will Dr. Marsh remember any of this?" Eleanor's smile was both sad and knowing. "Time is a circle on the other side, Daniel. Perhaps we've had this conversation before. Perhaps we'll have it again." The glow around her intensified, spreading outward through the water. The dark shapes beneath the surface recoiled from it, retreating into the depths with movements that suggested pain or fear. "Go," Eleanor shouted, her voice suddenly powerful enough to carry over the storm. "Go now." I started the boat's engine and turned away, fighting back tears that immediately froze on my cheeks. Behind me, the light grew brighter, casting my shadow long across the churning waves ahead. I didn't look back until I was a quarter-mile away. What I saw then will haunt me for the rest of my days. A column of blue-white light extending from the ocean's surface straight up into the storm clouds, with Eleanor suspended at its center, her arms outstretched, her hair flowing upward as if underwater. The sea around that column churned and boiled, and I swear I heard screams, not human screams, but something older and more terrible, rising above the howl of the wind. And then, between one heartbeat and the next, it was gone. The light, the column, Eleanor, all vanished. The storm remained, but the sea where that impossible event had occurred was now just water, dark and ordinary beneath the winter sky. I returned to Blackrock Station as dawn broke, the storm finally beginning to abate. I packed my few belongings, erased all evidence of my unauthorized presence, and left that place forever. 3 days later, I received a call from Coast Guard headquarters. Dr. Eleanor Marsh, the marine archaeologist who had consulted on our case, had been reported missing. Her colleagues at the university said she'd left for a solo research expedition on December 15th and never returned. Her car had been found abandoned at a small harbor 20 miles south of Blackrock Station. When they asked if I had any information about her plans or whereabouts, I lied. I said we'd spoken only briefly about the Minerva case, that she'd mentioned no specific research intentions to me. The official on the phone sounded disappointed but not suspicious. Strange coincidence, he remarked before hanging up. Dr. Marsh was a leading expert on the Minerva, been studying that shipwreck her entire career. Apparently she had a personal connection. Her great-grandmother was supposed to have been a passenger on that voyage but missed the departure due to illness. I've left the Coast Guard now. I live in a small house on a mountain in Vermont, as far from the ocean as I could reasonably get. Sometimes, on stormy nights, I dream of dark water and pale blue eyes. Sometimes I wake to find salt water pooled on my pillow, though whether it's tears or something else I cannot say. The sea keeps its secrets well, but now I keep them too. And sometimes when the wind howls just right, I think I hear her voice, Eleanor's voice, whispering that time is a circle, that what has happened will happen again, that the door swings both ways. I pray she's wrong. But the ocean is patient and very, very deep.